"You'll never own a house like Preston's." Dad said it between bites of roast chicken, the same way he used to announce the weather, casually cruel without a hint of thought behind it. My brother laughed, a short, sharp laugh that sounded like approval. The knife in my hand paused midair, hovering over my plate. For a moment I thought I hadn't heard him right. They laughed when I dreamed, but I turned their laughter into my strength. If you've ever been told you can't, you need to hear this story. But I had. The kitchen clock ticked behind me, its sound louder than before. 6:45, Thursday evening. The smell of garlic butter filled the room, and somewhere outside, a dog barked at nothing. I remember all of it, because that's the night something inside me changed shape. I put the knife down gently, wiped my hands on the napkin and smiled. "You're probably right, Dad." My voice was calm, maybe too calm. My brother grinned wider, thinking he'd won whatever game they were playing. I just took another sip of water and pretended to study the curtains. What I was really doing was memorizing everything. The angle of my father's smirk, the smug lift of my brother's eyebrow, every detail I'd need later. Dad leaned back in his chair, pleased with himself. "It's not an insult, honey. It's just reality. A woman your age should think smaller. Something manageable. Leave the big properties to men who know what to do with them." The word manageable burned worse than any insult could. I looked down at my hands that had cleaned his house, cooked his meals, helped pay his bills when he was behind on property taxes. He'd never called those things manageable. But I didn't say that. I just smiled again, folded my napkin neatly and let the conversation die. Silence has always been my sharpest weapon, they just never noticed. My brother, Dennis, reached for another serving. "Don't take it personally, sis. Preston's worked hard. Not everyone can be that lucky." He laughed again, chewing loudly. The gold watch on his wrist, a gift from Dad, flashed under the kitchen light. Preston. That name had been haunting this family for months. Dad's new favorite success story. Preston owned a real estate firm and a big white mansion on the east side of town. Every Sunday dinner turned into a sermon about Preston's achievements. His marble floors. His two-car garage. His perfectly trimmed hedges. It wasn't Preston they admired. It was what he represented. Everything they thought I couldn't be. I cleared the dishes slowly, one by one. They kept talking about mortgage rates and renovations, their voices blending into a background hum. I nodded where expected, but my mind was elsewhere, deep in a place I hadn't let myself go before. The place that whispered, "Prove them wrong." Not with words. With proof they can't laugh at. The kitchen sink was warm under my hands. The water hissed as I rinsed plates, and in that ordinary sound I made a decision, not out of anger but out of certainty. I didn't know how yet, but I would. When they left that night, Dad patted my shoulder as if I were some small, breakable thing. "Don't get too dreamy, sweetheart," he said. "Life's easier when you stay in your lane." I nodded. "I'll remember that." What he didn't know was, I already had a different lane in mind. The following morning I stood at the window with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over our quiet street. The sky was pale orange, the kind of calm that tricks you into thinking everything's fine. I replayed last night's words in my head, each one finding a new place to settle. They didn't sting anymore. They motivated. My phone buzzed, a text from Dennis. "Dad says you should talk to that broker I mentioned. Maybe get you into a small condo. Something realistic." I stared at the message until the screen went dark. Then I set the phone down and laughed softly. It wasn't bitterness anymore. It was clarity. That afternoon I went to work at the pharmacy like always. The same customers, the same routine. But every person I greeted, every receipt I handed out was part of something now. A plan only I understood. I'd been saving quietly for years. They never asked. They assumed I couldn't. That was my advantage. On my lunch break I pulled out a worn envelope from my purse. Inside were deposit slips, savings account summaries, and a note I'd written to myself years ago. "You don't need to win arguments. Just keep receipts." That weekend I visited Dad again. He was sitting on the porch reading the paper, coffee mug in hand. "Back already?" he said without looking up. "I brought you groceries," I said, setting the bags down. He liked to act like he didn't need help, but he never turned it down. Dennis's car was in the driveway. I heard him inside, laughing on the phone, talking about another investment deal. I didn't bother asking who he was helping this time. It was never me. Dad folded the paper. "You really should meet someone, you know." A woman alone at your age, it's not good. I smiled the same way I always did when he said things like that. I'm not alone, Dad. I have plans. He chuckled. Plans? What kind of plans? The kind that don't need approval. He frowned but didn't push. That's the thing about my father, he only heard what he wanted. He'd never been curious about me unless it benefited him. That evening I walked home through the park, the cold air stinging my cheeks. Kids were playing near the fountain. An old man fed pigeons. Everything looked ordinary, but in my chest something was shifting. I passed a bulletin board near the bench. A real estate flyer fluttered in the wind. Preston's estate group, dream homes for the modern family. I stopped. The photo showed a white mansion on a hill. His mansion. I traced the photo with my fingers. The windows, the columns, the curved driveway. I could almost hear Dad's voice echoing again. You'll never own a house like Preston's. I tore the flyer down, folded it carefully and slipped it into my coat pocket. That night I couldn't sleep. The house felt too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every thought. The clock read 2:03 a.m. I sat at the table with the flyer unfolded in front of me. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't care. I looked at the photo again. Then I whispered to myself, we'll see. It wasn't about Preston. It wasn't even about the house. It was about the look on my father's face, the one I hadn't seen yet but could already imagine. The disbelief. The realization that the daughter he dismissed had done what he never thought possible. I smiled in the dark. That image alone was worth every sleepless night ahead. 2 weeks later, another dinner. Same table. Same food. Same laughter. Preston just renovated his study, Dad said proudly, like he'd helped. Added a marble fireplace. That man knows how to build something lasting. Dennis chimed in. Yeah, I told him to look at that mansion on Lakewood Drive. The view's insane. You should see it, sis. Maybe clean there once in a while, you'd get inspired. I didn't flinch. I'd learn not to. Maybe I'll do that, I said, sipping my water. You never know what inspires a person. Dad smirked, mistaking politeness for surrender. I excused myself early, claiming a headache. When I reached the door, I glanced back at them. My father in his worn recliner, my brother checking his reflection in the window. Both men so sure they'd written my story for me. They didn't notice me looking. That's when I realized. People who underestimate you never see the moment they lose control. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting. I walked to my car, started the engine and sat for a minute watching their lights through the window. Laughter drifted faintly through the walls, muffled but constant. I put the car in gear. The headlights illuminated the driveway, the mailbox, the world they thought I'd never outgrow. But I was already gone. Not physically, not yet, but mentally miles ahead. I had no mansion, no blueprint, no certainty. Just one quiet promise I'd made to myself. One day they'll stand on a doorstep they think belongs to someone else. And I'll be the one opening the door. I drove home in silence, the road stretching empty ahead. The city lights flickered in the distance like tiny stars. The radio played some old song about love and regret, but I turned it off. There would be no regret where I was headed. Only proof. When I parked in front of my small rented house, I sat there for a moment, staring at the porch light I'd fixed myself. It flickered once, then steadied, a small, stubborn glow in the dark. I smiled. Good, I whispered. Stay on. But so would I. When I turned off the car engine that night, the porch light was still flickering, stubborn just like me. I sat there a few more seconds, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal under the hood. The neighborhood was quiet, most windows dark except for one across the street where an old couple watched television. I could see their faces glow in the blue light, calm and content. I wondered if they'd ever had to prove their worth to anyone. I went inside, hung up my coat and looked around my little rental. The heater rattled like it was coughing and the wallpaper had started to peel in the corner, but it was mine, at least for now. I made a cup of tea, wrapped both hands around it and whispered again, stay on. The bulb above the sink hummed but didn't die. It was a small victory, but at that point small victories were all I had. The next morning came like every other, early, cold and demanding. The alarm buzzed at 5:30. My knees ached when I stood, my back ached when I stretched, but I got dressed anyway. The blue uniform I wore for the nursing home was clean, ironed and older than most of my coworkers. I tied my hair in a bun, looked at my reflection and said quietly, you don't need to look powerful to be powerful. At work, I fed patients who no longer remembered their own names, wiped tables, folded blankets, and listened to stories that repeated every day like stuck records. Some of them called me honey, some darling, a few even thought I was their daughter. I didn't mind. It was strange, being invisible to the people you helped. But invisibility can be a gift if you learn how to use it. No one notices the person they underestimate, and that's what makes her dangerous. Every paycheck I split in 3: rent, groceries, and savings. My savings folder had no name, no label, just an envelope hidden behind an old cereal box. The first deposit was $50. The next, $75. Over the months, it grew slowly like a secret garden no one could trample. On weekends, when I wasn't at the nursing home, I worked at the grocery store. The fluorescent lights were harsh, the customers demanding, and the manager half my age. Still, every thank you and have a nice day added up to something. There was a rhythm to it: work, save, rest, repeat. Sometimes I'd see families come through my lane. Fathers bragging about their new trucks, sons laughing at their mothers for using coupons. It always stung a little, but I learned to hide that feeling behind the same calm smile. A smile no one could read. Dennis rarely called. When he did, it was short and businesslike. Dad wants you to check on his taxes. Or, Preston's throwing a party, maybe you'll get invited if you dress up nice. I'd laugh politely and change the subject. They thought I was still standing still while they moved forward. They didn't realize I was learning, quietly, persistently, and faster than they'd ever expect. 2 years passed that way. Then came a Sunday afternoon that changed everything. At the nursing home, a new patient arrived. Mrs. Carter, an elegant woman in her late 70s with silver hair and a sharp memory. She was nothing like the others. She didn't gossip, didn't complain. She asked questions. One day while I changed her sheets, she said, "You have the hands of a builder, not a caretaker." I laughed. A builder? I can't even afford to fix my faucet. She tilted her head. Then start smaller. Learn how. Nothing's built all at once. Those words stuck with me. A week later, she lent me an old book she kept by her bedside, Real Estate for Beginners. "Take it," she said. "I'm done building. You're not." I read it cover to cover that night. Then I read it again. That's how it started, my quiet education. Over the next few months, I learned everything I could: property values, investment basics, mortgage terms. I watched free tutorials on an old laptop, made notes, and practiced calculations until midnight. It wasn't easy. I fell asleep with my glasses on more than once, and sometimes my hands trembled from exhaustion. But I didn't stop. One evening, during dinner break, Mrs. Carter asked me, "What will you do with all this knowledge?" I smiled. "Something that'll make people regret thinking I was small." He nodded, amused. "Good. Make it count." A few weeks later, she passed away quietly in her sleep. Her daughter came to collect her things. As she thanked me for my care, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was Mrs. Carter's handwritten note. "A woman's silence is not weakness, it's strategy." I kept that note pinned to my fridge. Years continued to roll by like clockwork. Inflation went up, the nursing home changed management, and I turned 62 without much celebration. My hair went grayer, my walk slower, but my purpose never dulled. My savings reached a point I'd never thought possible. By then, my little side business, handmade quilts I sold online, had started picking up. I'd named it Quiet Hands. Orders came from all over. Small towns, retirement homes, even a few boutique stores. I didn't tell my family. Not out of spite, but because their disbelief would have ruined the joy of it. Sometimes I imagined Dennis scrolling online and seeing one of my quilts in some designer's post. The thought made me smile. One rainy Tuesday, while balancing invoices, I found an email from a realtor. Upcoming property listing, Lakewood Drive Estate. Serious inquiries only. Lakewood Drive. Preston Street. For a moment I froze, my heart knocking like it had found a door it didn't expect to open. That mansion had been a family obsession for years. I still remembered Dad's voice bragging about it, the same night he told me I'd never own anything like it. I stared at the email for a long time before closing the laptop. It felt like fate had quietly circled back. A few days later, Dennis called. "Hey, you still in that old rental?" "Yes," I said evenly. "Well, Preston's selling. Dad and I are thinking about looking at it this weekend. Just for fun. You should come if you want to see what a real house looks like." The tone was the same, Smug, superior, careless. I might just do that, I said, my voice light. He laughed. Sure. Anyway, see you Sunday. When he hung up, I stared at my reflection in the window. The rain had left streaks on the glass, cutting across my face like cracks, but my eyes looked steady. It wasn't about jealousy anymore. It was about justice. That weekend before work I drove to Lakewood Drive. Just to see it again. The mansion stood tall behind iron gates, white columns shining even in cloudy light. The for sale sign was tilted slightly, rain dripping off its edge. I parked across the street, turned off the engine and just watched. Couples walked by with strollers, joggers passed, and a delivery truck unloaded boxes. Life moved like normal. But inside me something very deliberate began to align. I didn't go in that day. I didn't call the realtor. Not yet. Instead, I went home and opened my notebook, the same one I'd used for years to track my savings. I made a new page and titled it simply, Lakewood. Under it, I wrote a single sentence. If they can't see what you're building, let them laugh until you finish it. Months went by. My plan sharpened quietly. I spoke to no one, took no advice. I met with a financial advisor, a woman about my age who smiled when I told her what I wanted. You're not too late, she said. You're just early to your next chapter. Together we reviewed numbers, investments, and options. Every late night I'd ever worked, every insult I'd swallowed, it all had led here. I still went to the nursing home. I still bagged groceries twice a week. On the outside I was the same woman. Inside though, I was building something they'd never understand. One evening while cooking I heard my voicemail beep. Dad's voice crackled through the speaker. Your brother says you're still renting. Don't you ever want stability? You're too old to chase impossible dreams. I turned off the stove, listened until the message ended, then deleted it. No anger. Just peace. It wasn't impossible anymore. The next week Mrs. Carter's daughter emailed me unexpectedly. She'd found an old folder of her mother's investment contacts and wanted me to have them. She trusted your instincts, she wrote. Inside the folder was the name of a realtor. The same agency from the Lakewood listing. My breath caught. It felt like the universe had just nudged me forward. That night I didn't sleep again. I sat with the folder open, numbers and names glowing in lamplight. The world outside was silent, but my mind wasn't. I could hear Dad's voice, "You'll never own a house like Preston's." And Dennis's laughter. And underneath it my own quiet reply, "We'll see." The years they never asked about were the ones that made me dangerous. They thought I disappeared because I stopped talking. What they didn't realize was that I was learning how to speak in a new language, the kind made of deeds, signatures, and keys. And soon I'd be fluent. The next morning I woke up before dawn. The sky was still dark, that soft gray before sunrise when the world feels half asleep. I brewed my coffee and opened the folder Mrs. Carter's daughter had sent, the one with the realtor's contact list. The agency name was familiar. I'd seen it before. In glossy magazines, billboards on Main Street, even on that for sale sign in front of Preston's old mansion. The name felt like fate tapping me on the shoulder. I picked up the phone and dialed the number written in her delicate handwriting. My fingers trembled slightly, but my voice didn't. "Good morning," I said when the line clicked. "I'm calling about a property on Lakewood Drive." There was a pause on the other end, polite, professional, curious. "Of course, ma'am. May I ask your name?" "Margaret," I said. My voice came out steady. "Margaret Lane." It felt strange using my full name after so many years of being just Maggie. The daughter, the sister, the one who never quite measured up. But in that moment it sounded right. The woman on the line, Sarah, explained that the house was indeed still available, though there had been several inquiries. "It's a lovely place," she added, her tone cautious. "But the price point is significant." "I understand," I replied. "I'd like to schedule a private viewing." The drive to Lakewood that afternoon felt different this time. I wasn't there to admire. I was there to decide. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the road glistened under the sunlight breaking through clouds. Every turn felt familiar, the same route Dad used to brag about whenever he'd talk about Preston's perfect neighborhood. The mansion came into view slowly, rising behind tall hedges like a memory I'd been chasing. White columns, arched windows, a wraparound porch that curved like a smile. It was the same house that had lived rent-free in my family's conversations, but now it felt smaller. Sarah met me at the gate, mid-40s, professional smile, clipboard in hand. "Beautiful day for a showing," she said, unlocking the gate. "Yes," I answered. "It's been a long time coming." Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and new paint. My shoes echoed softly against the marble floor. The living room opened into a wide space with tall windows that let in light like a cathedral. Sarah began the usual speech: square footage, recent renovations, nearby schools, but her words blurred into background noise. My focus drifted over the staircase, the fireplace, the glint of sunlight on glass. For a moment, I imagined Dad standing in the doorway, that smug grin faltering as he realized I wasn't there as a guest. "How old is this place?" I asked. "Built in 1983, she replied. "Preston's company refurbished it 5 years ago. He listed it privately last month. It's expected to sell fast." Her tone softened when she looked at me. "It's quite a home. Most people just want to see it, not buy it." I smiled faintly. "Then I suppose I'm not most people." She hesitated, then nodded, sensing something she couldn't quite name. We walked through the rooms. The sunroom with its glass walls, the study lined with built-in shelves, the kitchen with its perfect white counters. My hands brushed over surfaces like I was memorizing them. Each detail was a quiet rebellion against every word they'd thrown at me. In the master bedroom, Sarah lingered near the window. "You remind me of my mother," she said suddenly. "She always said women your age were underestimated. But they never stay that way for long." Her words landed softly but deeply. I didn't respond right away. I just looked out the window, watching the trees sway in the wind. When the tour ended, she handed me a glossy brochure. "I can send the financial documents if you're serious." "I am," I said simply. That evening, I sat at my small dining table, the papers spread out in front of me. My hands trembled as I read the numbers. 6 figures that once would have felt impossible. But I'd been preparing for this moment without knowing it for years. My quilt business had grown quietly. The online shop had loyal customers, even wholesale orders now. My savings had turned into investments, cautious but consistent. I'd done my homework, studied property taxes, fees, and contingencies. The old Maggie would have doubted herself. But the woman sitting at that table didn't. Still, my heart pounded. There's a kind of fear that comes not from weakness, but from realizing you're finally stepping into power. It's the fear of what happens when excuses run out. I took a breath, signed the pre-approval request, and scanned it to Sarah. "Done," I whispered. The next morning she called. "Margaret? Congratulations, you're qualified." Her voice was warm, almost surprised. "Would you like to move forward?" "Yes," I said. "Let's do it." There was a pause, then the soft sound of typing. "We'll schedule the signing for Friday morning. Would you like me to inform anyone else on your behalf?" I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "No. Let's keep it quiet." Friday came sooner than I expected. I woke early, made coffee, and laid out my clothes. A plain navy dress and a beige coat. Nothing fancy but neat. The kind of outfit that didn't need to prove anything. The drive to the office felt surreal, like walking into a story I wasn't supposed to be part of. Inside, the air smelled faintly of printer ink and carpet cleaner. Sarah greeted me with a warm handshake. "Ready?" I nodded. More than ever. She led me into a conference room. There was a long table, a stack of documents, and a silver pen. Across from me sat a man from the legal department. Polite, expressionless, the kind of person who's seen 1,000 signings but never the story behind any of them. "Please review each page carefully," he said. "Your initials go here, here, and here." I took the pen, my hands steady. The pages turned one after another. Each signature another piece of my silence transformed into proof. The pen's soft scratch on paper sounded almost like breathing. When it was done, Sarah smiled. "Congratulations, Mrs. Lane. The property is officially yours." For a long moment I didn't speak. I just stared at the final page. My name in black ink, bold and unshakable. Outside, the air smelled like spring rain. The sky had cleared, and the sun broke through clouds in a way that made everything glow. I sat in my car, resting both hands on the steering wheel. I thought of Dad's voice, Dennis's laughter, the nights I'd spent awake counting pennies and wondering if any of it would matter. It mattered now. The phone buzzed, a text from Dennis. "Dad and I are heading to Lakewood to see Preston's place. You should come if you want to know what success looks like." I laughed out loud, a soft, disbelieving laugh that filled the car. I typed back, "Maybe I'll drop by." And for the first time it wasn't sarcasm. It was a promise. Before heading home I stopped by the mansion one more time, this time with the keys in my pocket. The gate creaked open, the gravel crunching under my shoes. The afternoon light hit the windows just right, making them shimmer. I walked through each room slowly, touching the banister, the doorknobs, the smooth edges of the kitchen counter. I could still smell fresh paint. There's something holy about standing in a place that once existed only as someone else's bragging right. I stood in the living room, looked up at the high ceiling and whispered, "You were wrong, Dad." My voice didn't echo. It settled, absorbed into the walls like truth finding its home. Over the next few days I arranged everything quietly, utilities, modest furniture, a new mailbox. Nothing extravagant. Just enough to make it mine. At night I'd sit on the porch watching cars pass by, the crickets singing in the dark. Sometimes I'd see my reflection in the window. A woman who'd spent decades invisible but never powerless. I kept thinking about how nobody had ever asked what I wanted. Not once. They'd asked for favors, for advice, for help, but never what I wanted. Now I had my answer. And soon they'd see it too. On Wednesday Sarah called. "Just a reminder. The property will be listed as sold this Friday." Preston's agent and a few potential buyers had planned to visit before we pulled it off the market. "We'll notify them it's been purchased." "Actually," I said, "let's leave it listed until Friday evening. I don't mind one more showing." She hesitated, sensing something in my tone. "Understood." That Friday morning I cleaned the kitchen counters, straightened the curtains and set out a vase of white lilies. The air smelled faintly sweet, calm. When I looked at the driveway through the window I saw a familiar car turning in, silver, polished, loud. Dad's. Behind it Dennis's SUV. They parked side by side like always, father and son, united in everything except humility. I smoothed my dress and walked toward the door. Not yet, I told myself. Don't let the story end too soon. I stood there listening to their voices echo from the porch, laughing with the realtor about finally seeing what success looks like. The handle felt cool under my palm. And just before I opened it I smiled, not with anger but with certainty. They were about to step into something they'd never expected. And I was fluent now. I stood there, hand on the cool brass handle, listening to their laughter spill through the front door. It was the same sound I'd grown up hearing, the sound that used to shrink me. But today it didn't. It washed over me like background noise in a story that no longer belonged to them. Dad's voice carried first. "You can tell this place has good bones," he said proudly as if he'd built it himself. Then Dennis added, "Yeah, Preston always had taste. These pillars are real stone, not the cheap stuff." Their footsteps echoed on the porch. I could picture them both. Dad in his old gray jacket that smelled faintly of pipe smoke, Dennis in his pressed shirt, car keys jingling like a badge of success. The realtor's voice joined theirs, cheerful, unaware. "Gentlemen, the house has just been sold, but the buyer requested to be here during your visit. She'll meet you inside." Dad chuckled. "Must be some rich widow. Well, I'm curious to see who outbid Preston himself." I turned the knob slowly and opened the door. For a heartbeat no one spoke. Dennis froze mid-step, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the entry rug. Dad's smile faltered, confusion spreading across his face like a shadow. "Hello," I said softly. "You're just in time for the tour." The silence that followed was thick enough to hear the clock ticking in the hallway. "Maggie." Dad's voice cracked just a little. "What are you doing here?" I stepped aside. "You wanted to see the house. Please come in." Dennis blinked rapidly, eyes darting from me to the realtor, then back again. "Wait, you work here? Is this one of your cleaning jobs or something?" The insult rolled off me like dust. I didn't answer. Instead I gestured toward the living room. "This way." They hesitated, but curiosity pulled them forward. The realtor, poor woman, still didn't realize what was happening. "This is the main foyer," she said briskly, recovering her tone. "Original flooring, recently refinished. The buyer requested the furniture remain minimal for now." Dad ran his hand along the banister. "Solid oak," he muttered. "Expensive taste." Then turning to me, "You shouldn't be walking around a stranger's property, Maggie. Let's not embarrass ourselves." I smiled faintly. "Embarrassment's a family specialty, isn't it?" He frowned, confused by my calmness. We walked into the living room. The afternoon light poured through the tall windows, catching dust motes that danced in the air. The lilies on the table had opened fully, white and pure against the dark wood. Dennis whistled low. Not bad. Needs more color though. A house like this should look lived in. Oh, it will, I said. Dad's eyes narrowed slightly. So who's the new owner? Maybe we know them. I looked at the realtor. She glanced at me for confirmation. I nodded once. Mr. Lane, she said carefully, the buyer is standing right here. Dad blinked. Dennis let out a small laugh, assuming it was a joke. Very funny, he said. You mean she's staging it, right? Helping with? No, the realtor interrupted gently. She purchased the property outright last week. The room went utterly still. Dad's hand dropped from the banister. His lips parted but no sound came out. You bought this? Dennis finally said, his voice high with disbelief. You? Yes, I said quietly. Every inch of it. For a moment they just stared. Then came the excuses, quick, defensive, almost rehearsed. Where would you get that kind of money? Dad snapped. You barely make ends meet. I made more than you thought, I replied. Because you never asked. Dennis stepped closer, his jaw tightening. What did you do win the lottery? You couldn't have afforded this place. I didn't win anything, I said. I worked. I saved. I built something while you were laughing. The words came out calm, but underneath them was years of silence breaking all at once. Dad turned to the realtor, flustered. You must be mistaken. There's no way She's on the deed, the woman said firmly. Paid in full. He turned back to me, color rising in his face. You should have told us. You don't make big decisions like this alone. I didn't think you'd be interested, I said, meeting his eyes. You never were before. That stopped him. For the first time he didn't have a ready answer. We moved through the rest of the house in uneasy silence. The realtor did her best to keep the tour professional, but even she could feel the tension. Every room we entered was another reminder of what they thought I couldn't do. In the kitchen, Dennis leaned against the counter trying to regain control. So what's the plan? You gonna flip it? Or are you just showing off? I met his smirk with a steady look. No plan yet. Maybe I'll live here. Maybe I'll keep it empty for a while. Sometimes silence needs space. He rolled his eyes. You always were dramatic. I turned toward the window, watching the sunlight hit the driveway. You always were predictable. The realtor excused herself politely, saying she'd give us a moment. The front door clicked shut behind her. The quiet that followed was different now, heavier, closer. Dad walked around the room, fingers brushing over the counters, the light switches, the chrome fixtures. His movements were slower, unsure. I don't understand, he muttered. You're not supposed to have more than us. That sentence hung in the air, ugly and raw. I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not even triumph, just clarity. That's the problem, Dad. You thought success was something you handed down, not something others could earn. He sank into one of the bar stools, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Dennis crossed his arms. You know, you could have told us before buying it. Maybe we could have helped. I almost laughed. Helped? The last time I mentioned buying a house, you both told me to stay in my lane. I stayed in it long enough to build my own. He scowled. Don't twist our words. I don't need to, I said. They twisted themselves. A sudden gust of wind hit the windows. Outside, the sky had turned gray again, clouds rolling in fast. It felt symbolic somehow, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Dad rubbed his temples. You always were stubborn. I learned it from you, I said softly. He looked up then, and for the first time I saw something real flicker in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or disbelief that I'd finally stopped being the daughter who needed permission. You don't know what you're getting into, he said finally. Big houses bring big problems. Then I guess I'll solve them, I replied. The clock in the hallway chimed 3 times. The sound made him flinch, like it pulled him out of a memory. Dennis muttered, "This is insane. You can't even afford the taxes on a place like this." I can, I said. I checked. He scoffed. You really think owning a mansion makes you better than us? No, I said, my voice calm but cold. It makes me free from you. He didn't expect that answer. He stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a man trying to breathe underwater. The argument dissolved into silence again, the kind that stretches between people who finally realize they have nothing left to say. I walked them to the foyer. The lilies by the table had started to wilt slightly, their edges curling, but they still smelled sweet. Dad stopped by the door. "So this is it? You're just done with family?" I looked at him, really looked. His hair had thinned, his shoulders sagged a little more than before. For a brief second I almost softened. Almost. "No, Dad," I said gently. "I'm done with being treated like one doesn't belong." He nodded slowly, not out of understanding but resignation. Dennis gave me a hard look. "You'll regret this." I smiled faintly. "Maybe. But it'll be my regret, not yours." They walked out without another word. Through the window I watched them head toward their cars. The realtor met them at the driveway, confused by the awkwardness she couldn't quite decipher. Dad didn't look back. Dennis said something under his breath before slamming his car door. Engines started, gravel crunched, and just like that, they were gone. The house fell silent again. I closed the door and leaned against it, my hands trembling. The adrenaline hit all at once, making me dizzy. I sank to the floor for a moment, laughing softly, not from joy but from release. Years of being invisible, dismissed, underestimated, all condensed into one moment that had finally passed. When I stood up, the lilies caught my eye again. I touched one gently. Its petals had started to fall, leaving a few empty stems behind. That's what endings look like, I thought. Not explosions. Just quiet shifts. The light outside dimmed as rain began to fall, soft and steady. I opened the window slightly. The air smelled clean, like something being washed away. For the first time in a long while I felt no need to explain myself. Not to them, not to anyone. They'd seen enough. I walked back through the house slowly, turning off lights, closing curtains, touching the walls as I passed. Every sound echoed differently now. Mine, not theirs. And somewhere deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of the peace I'd earned. The rain didn't stop that evening. It fell softly against the windows, the sound steady and rhythmic, like the house itself was breathing beside me. I stood by the open window, watching water streak down the glass, turning the world outside into a blur of gray and gold. My reflection floated there, faint, almost ghost-like, but different now. Stronger. So, behind me, the house creaked in that familiar way old homes do when they settle. It no longer felt intimidating. It felt alive, like it had accepted me. I closed the window gently and turned the latch. The air inside was warm, scented faintly with lilies and wood polish. I took off my shoes, walked barefoot through the hall, and let the quiet wrap around me. For years I'd dreamed of silence. Now that I had it, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. My phone buzzed on the counter. "Dennis." I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "What?" His voice came sharp, defensive. "Dad's upset. He thinks you embarrassed him." I leaned against the counter, tracing a drop of water down the glass of my mug. Did I? Or did he embarrass himself? "Maggie, don't start. You could have told us you were buying that place. We wouldn't have laughed if you'd been serious." I laughed softly. "Dennis, you laughed even when I wasn't joking." He went quiet for a moment. "You don't understand how this looks. People are talking. Dad says." "Dad said enough for a lifetime. Don't be cruel," he snapped. "He's still your father. And I'm still his daughter," I said. "But he forgot that part years ago." He exhaled hard through the receiver. "Fine. You win. You proved your point. Happy now?" I didn't respond. There it was. The confession I'd been waiting for, not in words of apology, but in the exhaustion of defeat. When he realized I wasn't going to bite, he added bitterly, "Enjoy your mansion, Maggie. It's probably too big for you anyway." Then the line went dead. I placed the phone down gently, no anger, no satisfaction, just peace. He'd said it himself. You win. I spent the next few hours wandering through the house. The rain had eased into drizzle and faint moonlight filtered through the skylight above the stairs. I moved from room to room, touching, remembering, claiming. The study smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. The walls echoed slightly when I spoke, so I whispered just to hear it. "Home," I said. In the living room, the lilies had started to droop. I carried them to the kitchen sink, trimmed their stems, changed the water. It felt like tending to something fragile that had survived the storm. When I turned back toward the hall, I noticed something on the floor near the front door. A smudge, faint but out of place. Mud. At first, I thought it was mine from earlier. But the pattern was wrong. Larger, heavier. Someone had been back. I walked to the entryway. The outer door was closed, but the handle looked slightly crooked as if it had been forced. For a moment I stood still, listening. The only sound was the ticking clock and distant thunder. Then a sharp knock shattered the quiet. It came again, louder this time. "Open up," Dennis's voice called through the door. "We need to talk." I didn't move. "Dad's in the car," he continued, his tone hardening. "He wants an apology." I almost laughed. An apology? From me? After all these years? The knock turned into pounding. "I'm serious, Maggie. You're not shutting us out like this. We're family." I stepped closer, my bare feet silent on the floor. The brass handle glowed under the porch light filtering through the glass panel. His shadow shifted behind it. Impatient, angry. "Go home, Dennis. You can't just cut us off." "I already did," I said. "You just didn't notice." He slammed his hand against the door again. "You think you're better than us now? You think this house makes you something?" I pressed my palm against the wood, calm. "No, Dennis. I think it made you small." There was a pause, a long, heavy pause. Then his voice dropped lower. "You'll regret this, Maggie. Dad's not going to forgive you." "Good," I said quietly. "Then we're even." Outside, I heard his footsteps retreat to the car. The engine roared to life, then faded down the road until there was nothing left but rain. When silence returned, it felt different, cleaner somehow. I locked the door slowly, the metal clicking into place with finality. The sound echoed through the house, firm, satisfying, absolute. That single click meant more than any apology ever could. It wasn't just a lock, it was closure. I leaned my forehead against the door and exhaled. For the first time in decades, the fear of what they thought, or didn't think, didn't exist anymore. The woman who used to seek their approval had vanished. The one standing here didn't need anyone to open the door for her again. The following morning, the sky cleared. The rain had left the driveway glistening, the air crisp and clean. I brewed coffee and took it out to the porch, still in my robe, watching the sun rise over the wet trees. A car slowed near the gate, the mail carrier. He waved and I waved back. The ordinary rhythm of life returning. When he left, I went inside and sat at the kitchen table with a small stack of paperwork. The deed. Utility contracts. Business receipts. Every document with my name on it felt like proof of existence. I opened a drawer and took out a small photograph I'd found the day before while unpacking. It was from decades ago. Me, Dad, and Dennis standing in front of the old family house. I was in my 20s holding a paintbrush, covered in flecks of white paint. Dad had his arm around Dennis, both of them grinning. I stood a little apart, half smile, half shadow. I studied it for a long time. Then I placed it inside an envelope marked past and tucked it into a box in the closet. Not out of bitterness, just completion. That afternoon I had a visitor, the realtor Sarah. She stopped by to drop off final documents and check in. "Still settling in?" she asked, handing me a folder. "More than I expected," I said, smiling. She looked around the space approvingly. "You've made it feel lived in already. It suits you." I poured her a cup of tea. "It's strange. When I first walked through this house, I felt like an outsider. Now, I can't imagine ever leaving." Sarah leaned on the counter. "You know," she said gently, "when you first called, I thought you were just another dreamer. But you knew exactly what you wanted." "I did," I said. "And what I didn't want." She laughed softly. "Well, that's half the battle." When she left, I watched her car disappear down the street, then turn the key again. Not because I feared anyone, but because it felt right. The click echoed once more, sharp and perfect. Evening came quietly. I made soup, read a few pages from Mrs. Carter's old real estate book, and sat by the window watching dusk turn to night. The house lights reflected faintly in the glass, soft golden halos against the dark. I thought of Mrs. Carter's note. "A woman's silence is not weakness, it's strategy." I smiled. She'd been right. Silence had been my weapon all along. Not loud revenge, not shouting matches. Just the steady, unstoppable proof of endurance. Later, as I walked upstairs, I paused at the top step, looking down at the front door. The lock gleamed faintly in the low light. That small, simple piece of metal had done what years of pleading couldn't. It had drawn a boundary. It had closed a chapter that should have ended long ago. I whispered to it, "Keep them out. Keep me in." And I knew it would. Weeks passed. The house filled slowly, a new rug here, a bookshelf there. I didn't rush it. I wanted to choose everything carefully, not just for comfort but for meaning. One evening while folding laundry I received a letter from Dennis. No return address, just my name written in his hurried scrawl. Inside a single line. "Dad says he's sorry." I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer beside the deed. I didn't need to respond. The apology wasn't for me. It was for the man who couldn't face his own reflection. The seasons changed. Leaves turned gold, then fell. Winter came with its quiet chill. One night, snow began to fall outside, thick and silent. I walked to the door, opened it just a crack, and let the cold air brush my face. The world outside was still, blanketed in white. I closed the door gently, turned the lock one last time, and smiled. That sound, that soft metallic click, was everything. It wasn't just the end of a story. It was the sound of freedom, of dignity reclaimed, of a woman finally safe in her own walls. And as the snow kept falling, I whispered to the quiet, "This is mine." The story closes with full emotional payoff. Her victory complete through quiet power, self-respect, and final closure. The revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's earned, intelligent, and deeply satisfying for your audience. Sometimes silence is the sweetest revenge. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more powerful tales of justice, dignity, and redemption. Your story matters too.